It seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts. It's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, and I am joined as always by JB. You can find me on Twitter at Ben_Grant, and JB is at X's and Argos JB. And of course, you can find all of our content, spoken, written, or otherwise, at xsandargos.com. So it was a relatively quiet week in Argo land, only a handful of transactions, and we'll go over those. And we'll follow that up with a roster comparison between the crew that we left with in 2019 and the team that we're sitting with right now. And then, of course, we'll wrap up the episode with a Black History Month piece where we look back at the incredible accomplishments of the player who made me an Argos fan, but more importantly, a player that really overcame some incredible obstacles and did a lot both for football and for the CFL in terms of anti-Black racism. So that is all coming up on today's episode. JB, have you noticed at all on Twitter people getting angry at the number of signings the Argos have made?
Yeah, I think there's a fear out there that the Argos are. I don't know if people are scared of the Argo picks, but I think there is a frustration that their team is seemingly signing no one. I think it's more that than they wish they signed who we signed. But I think there is a frustration that so many of the teams in the league seem very inactive in comparison.
I decided I would look up the numbers because I wasn't sure how much. I obviously focus a lot more on what's happening in Toronto than I do what's happening in Saskatchewan or Edmonton or anywhere else. But I know there are a lot of people that seem to feel that Toronto had signed, 200 guys and everyone else was sitting there with 30. But that's simply not the case. And Toronto actually doesn't have that many players compared to other teams. I went through the list and I'll break it down for you here. So Ottawa currently has 110 players on their roster. Saskatchewan 103, Montreal 103, Edmonton 101, Hamilton 95, and Toronto one behind with 94. And then you have Calgary at 90, BC at 90, and Winnipeg with a mere 77. So the idea that Toronto is signing, way more players than everyone else is just false. So I think what it is and it's like what you're saying, there's a jealousy factor there, where it's not the number of players Toronto is signing, it's how high profile they are, and that they may be, in any particular case, the favorite player of the person complaining, sitting in Edmonton or Saskatchewan or where have you.
Yeah, I think the Argos have done a really good job of churning up their roster and showing an absolute desire to play this season and to have the team be significantly better. It's really been an absolute joy from, an Argo fan and, for you and I and this pod. It's been a godsend because the Argos, under Pinball, are clearly interested in becoming a national force again. I think the days of being a punchline are definitely over.
So let's take a look at the two guys that we just signed yesterday. Blake Camper, an O-lineman out of South Carolina that I hadn't heard of before, and I had to look up his information. He's kind of an intriguing one. And also Coney Ealy, 6'4", defensive end out of Mizzou, who I did know because of his time in the NFL. And he has a really interesting story, a really sad story. And he's a player that I don't think any fans will have trouble cheering for when the season starts. So let's go through both these guys. So let's start with Blake Camper. So he's an offensive lineman, South Carolina. Like I said, he's very tall, 6'8", 309. He's almost exclusively played right tackle. There was a little bit of left tackle in relief, and it didn't actually go that well. Right tackle is his position that he's best at. There's not much question about that. And he didn't play a lot at South Carolina. He didn't play really at all as a freshman or a sophomore. Got into a number of games as a junior and actually looked excellent at right tackle. Dropped off a little bit as a senior. He's a good pass blocker, and I think that's encouraging. He didn't catch on in the NFL. He signed as an undrafted free agent with the Chargers and didn't stick, and that's because of his run blocking. But I think that's less of an issue in the CFL, so I think there is an opportunity here. He's certainly a very large individual who played for a really high-profile program and spent 2 years basically as the right tackle. There are some concerning things right at the end of his last season in his senior year. He was replaced by a freshman, which, that could have been because South Carolina they weren't going anywhere, and it was a situation where they maybe wanted to see what they had in some of the younger guys. Who knows? But that was a bit of a red flag. But, we'll see what we have. I don't think right tackle isn't a huge need right now, but this is somebody that could maybe be brought in to fight for a roster spot and maybe as some depth. But I don't think at this point, knowing just the limited amount of information that I have right now, I don't think this is a player that's going to be making waves. But yeah, it's an interesting signing, and the first signing we've had at offensive line in quite a while.
Yeah, they clearly seem to be more focused on the skill positions, if you will. My apologies to offensive linemen out there. It makes sense. The more they bring in, it doesn't cost them a lot of money. Why not bring in a bunch of tickets and see if one of them hits? I don't know why you wouldn't.
No, exactly. And I think we might see a few more offensive linemen come in. I was kind of like looking at the positional groups. I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple more DBs come in, even though I know we've got a lot on the roster. I don't know how many sure things there are, though. So I think there may be a few more DBs that come in. Definitely a few linebackers. We're at least a couple short. And yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing a few offensive linemen brought in. We can field this team with all the guys that we have now and be perfectly fine. But those are some positions where you could still see pieces being added. Let's turn our attention to Coney Ealy. So Coney Ealy was a superstar at Mizzou. He was drafted in the second round by Carolina, and he right away as a rookie was producing. And in his second year, of course, Carolina went to the Super Bowl, and he had one of the best defensive performances in a Super Bowl in history, with 3 sacks, a forced fumble, and an interception. It's just a massive game. And so he was pretty much as high as you can get, other than, of course, they didn't win the game. But as an individual performance, it was astonishingly good. And so you'd think he was set, but things took an unfortunate turn. He started battling injuries, and then his father passed away. And just shortly after that, his sister LaToya passed away, both from respiratory diseases. And to add to this, Coney had promised his father that when he died, he would take care of his other sister, Sierra, who had a chromosome disorder that left her mentally and physically challenged. And so the combination of all of these things, the added responsibility, the loss of his father, the loss of his sister, and the injuries and the trouble that he was suddenly having on the football field, it was too much. And he broke down. And he couldn't work out. He couldn't play football. He didn't want to talk about it. He locked himself basically, in his own head and wouldn't talk to anyone about it. And what eventually turned it around for him was the birth of his daughter. At that point, he knew he needed to get help, and he knew he needed to start opening up and talking about some of the issues that he had. And he started doing that, and eventually got to a pretty good headspace and started getting back in shape, and just was in a pretty good place, opening up and talking about the depression that he had been going through. And when the XFL came knocking, he was ready to go. And of course, we know Toronto has been keeping a very close eye on the XFL. So that's obviously where they saw him and brought him in. So we'll see what Coney Ealy has left. But, what a story. For a guy to go through this much tragedy, you can't help but root for a man like that.
Agree. I at first I had some mixed feelings. As in my other hat, I cheer for the Patriots of New England. And, we didn't have a great experience, but I didn't know the backstory with him. And I agree. I think that he obviously got himself back on track with the XFL, and he's keen to play ball. And, come on up here and join the dream team.
Exactly. And it's funny though, because like he is a defensive end. You look at his measurables and I'm thinking like, you think there's any plan to push him inside? Like he's 273. He's a pretty big guy, but he just hasn't played there. I looked through his snaps and his alignment in the NFL, and he's really only been used as an outside rusher, as a defensive end. He hasn't been used in the middle. Now it is a bit of a size difference. So, maybe that 273 is, I know it is enough weight wise. You can be fine in the middle at 273. We've seen guys, way less than that, but it's a whole different skill set. So I think he is there to battle for the defensive end spot along with everybody else. The other 15 guys, that all high profile guys like Shane Ray, who was playing in that same Super Bowl against him. There's just a ton of defensive ends we've got on the roster, but here's one more, and like I said, one that I think everyone will be cheering for.
I like Ealy. I like Ealy more because I do think that he's a little bit more of an edge setter than a pure pass rusher. So I'm looking forward to that because I think that they do need that. I mean, obviously you want to be able to get after the quarterback, but you can't do that every down. So I think that if he can come in and and really set that edge, I think that would be a tremendous addition.
Absolutely. And I think, again, we're talking about, the strengths and weaknesses with Blake Camper and how the CFL might benefit him. I think the same thing with Ealy a little bit, because while he is that big body and he doesn't go flying after the QB like some of the other guys we've seen, his run stopping isn't terrific. That's something that held him back. His tackling is poor. His run defending is average. And it's really his sort of ability to, hold down that edge and contain and then, close that pocket without necessarily selling all out and going for that big play sack that made him a player in Carolina. So, yeah, I think the CFL game suits him quite well. But, we'll see. Again, it's going to be an amazing camp.
Well, it is important. I mean, in Canadian football, I know American football always talks about the edge, but my God, it is so important in Canadian football to keep the play in front of you and not let people bounce and get outside, because if you can't set the edge in Canadian football, you're dead.
And there's just so much space out there.
There's just so much field, so the quarterback rushers are great, but you find when you watch CFL games that a lot of sacks in Canadian football are coverage sacks. It's a slightly different game up here when it comes to sacks and defensive linemen than it is from the American game.
Another transaction that went along with the signing of Camper and Ealy was the releasing of Vince Maule, which I was surprised at and a little bit disappointed by. He's someone that I was really interested in seeing play, but unfortunately he's sort of he really is a tight end, and that's not a position we really have in the CFL. So I guess I could see from that standpoint, but I just thought he was going to be a matchup nightmare with his height and size and strength. I thought he was going to I really sort of saw him as a number 3 to the field, and running those short routes and just using his body to box out, and he's such a great athlete. So I don't know if that was on the Argos side or if it was on his side where, he looked around the room and decided, I don't know if I want to be a part of this, or if it was the Argos saying we're going to go in a different direction because we've got all these other weapons now. But yeah, he's unfortunately one of those now 31 players who were signed in 2020 who were never, ever going to get to see play as a Toronto Argonaut. I thought we'd take a look at the roster that we left in 2019 and compare it by position group to the 2021 roster. It's something that I thought if we can go position by position and you sort of, give me your thoughts and I'll give you my thoughts on whether or not this is an upgrade, whether or not this is a draw, or whether the 2019 group was better than the 2021 group. And when I started going through this initially, before I'd sort of mapped it all out, I was actually getting kind of nervous because I was remembering some of the pieces that we had. And it just occurred to me, we've got so many unproven CFL players on this roster. So while I'm really excited about a lot of the pieces we brought in, a lot of these American players, especially guys that are coming from the NFL, the truth is we don't really know what they're going to be like. And we've all seen guys coming in from the NFL that haven't succeeded. We've talked about it in this podcast before. Just because you're a good player in the NFL doesn't mean you're going to be a good player in the CFL. And like we've said before, it often, in fact, stacks the odds against you. So when I started doing that, I was getting a little bit nervous, but I've calmed down a little bit. I've got the list sort of out in front of me now, and I actually feel pretty good about where we stand at the moment. So why don't we start with quarterbacks? So 2019, we had the combination of just sort of going with starters. We had the combination of McLeod Bethel-Thompson and James Franklin, an offense that was designed for James Franklin that Macbeth ended up running. And then we compare that to what we've got in Nick Arbuckle as the starter, and then a trio of backups fighting for the backup job: Kelly Bryant, Antonio Pipkin, Nick Tiano. Where does your vote go? How do you see this? How do you see this working out?
Well, I know we have debated off air about this. I think it's a across the board improvement. I think that Nick Arbuckle is going to be a terrific CFL quarterback for us. I think the backups are, a really interesting group. I think that, I think Pipkin and Bryant, one of them will make the team as a change of pace. And I think Tiano is going to be a great backup. I like where we are from a quarterback position. I think that, Bethel Thompson and Franklin were fine, but I don't think they have the ceiling, or they had a ceiling that our new group doesn't. So that's what I would say. I don't think that our group is better, but I think our group has the potential to be really good. And I think that the old group had maxed out who they were going to be.
So I agree with pretty much everything you said, but I'm going to vote slightly differently because I feel like I can't vote for potential. I look at Macbeth and Franklin, and clearly we needed an upgrade. I actually like Macbeth, but I have been going back over the last few months and watching some of the games from 2019, and they look different than the way I remember them. We were behind a lot. There's a lot of garbage time touchdowns and yardage, and there were a lot of throws from Macbeth that there were completions, but the throws that weren't on the money that made for difficult catches for SJ and Darrell Walker and Armani Edwards and those guys. And so we clearly did need some improved quarterback play. That said, I know exactly what McLeod Bethel-Thompson is. I know what James Franklin is too, and I think McLeod is the better quarterback between the two of them. Nick Arbuckle unquestionably has looked better than either of those two guys. There's no doubt about that. But there's just not a lot to draw from. He hasn't played a lot of football in the CFL, and that makes me a little bit nervous. I think he'll be fine. I trust in Coach Dinwiddie, who is basically putting his first shot at being a head coach on the line here by bringing in Nick Arbuckle. He has to feel very confident that Arbuckle is going to be the guy, and the numbers that we saw him produce in Calgary last year will continue and will translate to this new team.
I would go so far to say is that he has wagered his entire coaching career, or at least his coaching career with the Toronto Argonauts, on Arbuckle. He doesn't have any head coaching experience. He is not a defensive mastermind. If they've given him his guy. If he can't turn Arbuckle into a top quality quarterback, then I think there are two people leaving on that horse.
And as far as the backup quarterback situation goes, it's exciting. It's like you said, these guys, all three of these guys could be great, and we'll see who wins the battles. I'm excited to see all three of them work. So I've ended up giving it a tie only because Arbuckle's resume is just so short. So I know what McLeod is. I don't know what any of the current guys are for sure. I think Arbuckle will end up being better than Macbeth, and I think Kelly Bryant and Nick Tiano. I'm really excited about both those guys. A little less so about Pipkin, but I think he's a really fun player to watch too.
I mean, we've kind of seen who Pipkin is.
Yeah.
He's less of an unknown than the other guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bryant, I think, has got a really exciting skill set. And Tiano just looks like every quarterback that the Argos lose and wins a Grey Cup somewhere else. So those are guys that I'm excited to watch too. All right, let's move on to offensive line. This one to me was pretty clear. So we're going with it. There were so many offensive linemen in 2019 that we churned through, but basically Sean McEwen at center is a big loss. He was an excellent center for us. Ryan Bauman at guard is gone. Tyler Holmes, I guess, played most of the guard play in 2019. And then Isaiah Cage and Jamal Campbell are both coming back. So you got the two tackles that are returning. So it's really just those interior guys you're talking about. So we're saying, like, are these new guys better than McEwen, Bauman, and Holmes and the collection of other pieces that filled in? And so we're kind of looking at Philip Blake, Darius Bladek, and Cody Speller. I'm assuming Cody Speller at the center spot. Where do you think we stand 2021 compared to 2019?
Yeah, this was a hard one. I think that it's an improvement, but I think that it is still in flux. I don't feel like they have locked down the offensive line yet. It was a problem in 2019. I think they've looked to try and bring some new people in. But would I say that this offensive line is locked and ready? I would not.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm not 100% on them. I feel good. I really like Philip Blake. I really like Bladek. I like Speller too, but I would feel better about it if he had been playing center for 5 years in the CFL and had looked great for all 5 of those years. But I think he will be good. I think it's probably a bit of a drop down from McEwen, but I do think we gain ground at both guard spots. I think you gain ground at tackle because both Campbell will definitely be a better Jamal Campbell in 2021 than he was in 2019, just because of the experience. And I think Isaiah Cage has a chance to be a little bit better too. And I'm not sure with the other guys in, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the other guys we have steps up and challenges these guys for those spots. So someone like Theron Churchill, I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up earning the starting spot. And so that has to be an improvement. So while I don't feel 100% comfortable with the offensive line, I think it's a win for the 2021 group. And I think there's not too much doubt in my mind that they're at least better. Are you putting your vote towards better or the same? I didn't officially get that.
It's hard to say. I mean, we have a new offensive line coach. Mm-hmm. It's such a coaching dependent position, offensive line, that if your offensive line coach is good, your offensive line is going to be good. It's just one of those positions where it makes such a huge difference what technique is being taught. I'm going to say the same right now because I have not yet seen McAdoo's work as offensive line coach for the Argos. So I'm going to say same.
All right, I think that's fair. All right, into the backfield. So if we're looking at the 2019 season as a whole, we've got James Wilder Jr., Chris Rainey, and then in the later stages of the season, AJ Willett. And we'll throw in our fullback there, Declan Cross. Or you could also, I guess, count Reggie Sibasu, but let's just focus on Cross, Willett, Rainey, Wilder. And the 2021 group, John White, freshly out of BC, Carlos Williams, Kenneth Dixon, Bishop Sankey, AJ Willett is coming back again, and Declan Cross is coming back again. JB, how do you see this group? Better, worse, or the same?
With Juan Blanco? I say better. I'm on record as not necessarily being the world's biggest fan of our running back potential. But I think John White has more than potential. I think he has a decent shot of being a really good running back for us. Sankey, Williams, Dixon, you got 3 guys. You only need one of them to hit. And I think if one of those guys hits, both those guys are better than what we had in 2019. I mean, I was a big Wilder fan. I don't think he had a great last season with the coaching staff. I don't know if he really had the gas that last season. He didn't look great. I don't think he was used very well, but he looked like he was done. And I didn't think Chris Rainey was really anything. So, I think I would give the new group the advantage over what we ran out there in 2019.
I don't think Chris Rainey was used properly in Toronto. Like I always felt like they didn't quite know what to do with him. They didn't quite know how to get him the ball, and you really only saw him in, on special teams plays, returning and so forth. Like he just didn't get a ton of time, and when he did, it just didn't look like it was stuff that was designed for him. Wilder Jr. I really like a lot. I think, when I look at comparing John White and Wilder Jr., I think I would give the edge to Wilder Jr. there. I think a lot of his troubles stem from the disagreements he had with the coaching staff. The offensive line was struggling. And I think given the same situation, I think Wilder Jr. outperforms John White. Now, when I look down the list at the other guys, when I look down the list at Bishop Sankey, Carlos Williams, Kenneth Dixon, I am incredibly excited about all three of those guys. But like I said before with Nick Arbuckle, I haven't seen enough from them in a different way. With Arbuckle, it's just because he hasn't had the opportunities yet. With these running backs, so much time has gone by since I last saw these guys. I have no idea what they're going to look like.
They are a little of yesteryear.
They're not that old. It's just that they, like, John White's the oldest of all of them, but it's just that they haven't played football in a few years and they've had injury issues. You've got like John White, I feel like John White's 29. Sankey and Williams, I think, are both 28, and Kenneth Dixon's 27, I think. So
yeah, but you only need one of them to hit.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I think they will. But in terms of putting my vote down, I just don't know if I can say the potential.
You need to turn on those 2019 games again.
I remember the 2019 games, but
I'm not talking about 2018 James Wilder. 2019 James Wilder.
I don't think it's on him. I very rarely, like, I'm not a big believer in a running back's performance being a lot to do with the running back. I think most of the time when a running back succeeds or when a running back fails, there are other reasons. There's offensive line, there's scheming, there's receiver blocking downfield. Yes, obviously it helps to have a very talented running back, but I just think with James Wilder Jr., I don't think he was the reason we weren't able to run the ball. I don't think it falls on his shoulders.
He certainly wasn't the solution.
He wasn't, but I don't think John White with that Argos team in 2019 would have looked very good at all. And he was a guy that had never even had a 1,000-yard season. Like, he had his first 1,000-yard season in BC. But going into that year, like, would you have felt good about John White with that Toronto Argonauts team? I can't think so. So I'm going to give the vote for running backs. I'm going to the 2019 crew. They get my vote.
Oh my God.
Now, that said, no one has raved about Sankey, Williams, and Dixon more than me. I'm really excited about them. I just can't vote for them yet. I need to see it. I need to see that they're not showing up, out of shape. That they
outrageous stance.
It's not outrageous. It's completely reasonable. So, from you that always calls me a homer, here I am. Well, I guess I'm still voting for the Argos, but
yeah,
not this current batch of running backs. So we'll see. I expect to be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't think that I can in
makes two of us
in good faith vote for the 2021 group until I've seen more. All right, let's move on to receiver as we round out the last positional group for the offense. So 2019, a season that had some stars: Darrell Walker, S.J. Green, Armani Edwards, and then you had Rod Smith playing that number 3 to the field, and Canadian Jimmy Ralph out at the Z. So up against them for the 2021 group, we've got DeVaris Daniels, Eric Rogers. I don't know who, like, those guys are definitely going to be on the field. Joanne Breskison's definitely going to be out there, probably playing the same spot Jimmy Ralph was, I would imagine. And so we're really talking about the Y spot, the R spot. I think probably Kendall Wright, Martavis Bryant. I think those two guys, those are both guys that have seen their best action when used as slot receivers. And so I would expect Martavis Bryant to be the number 2 and Kendall Wright number 3. to the field. That's my guess, but I haven't really thought too much about where everyone's going to play. But that's basically the group that we're looking at. We know there's a ton of other people. We've got 85 receivers under contract, but that's essentially what we're talking about. Are those guys better than Darrell Walker and S.J. Green and the crew from 2019?
Obviously Walker and Green are consummate CFL pros. And I think that there's no underestimating the value of having those guys in your roster. I do wish we had one more guy like them in the mix with our new squad. Having said that, I think like the quarterback situation, I think that there was a cap on what those guys could do in 2019. And that's not just with the hindsight. I would say, looking at that squad, before the season began, I would not have been thinking time to book a Grey Cup ticket. And I think looking at this group, the potential, again, I'm going to vote on potential. The potential is so much higher that I'm going to give them the nod.
I went through a similar process here. I think, so the way I started it was I started with the Canadian contingent. And I think that unquestionably you're going to get better production from Juwan Brescacin or Dejan Brissett, like the combination of those two guys compared to what we got out of Jimmy Ralph in 2019. So I think that's an easy win for the 2021 crew. Nothing against Jimmy Ralph, but there's a whole different set of skills that Juwan Brescacin brings and measurables that he brings, and Brissett just with his agility in his hands and his route running. I don't think there's much comparison there. So now when I look at the boundary side, the boundary side alone is probably a slight loss. Not bad though. Like Darrell Walker is a star. He looked horrible in 2019. We just couldn't get him the ball. He's going to look great again this year. I'm convinced of that. So I don't think we have anyone as good on the roster right now as Darrell Walker when he's playing well.
No, agreed.
And I'm not sure
as a Canadian football wide receiver.
Right, exactly. And I'm not sure we've got anyone better as like a slot possession guy than S.J. Green on the roster either. So, S.J. was right at the end of things, but even still, like he was just so good last year, even on this bad team, even with the issues getting receivers an accurate pass. SJ still looked fantastic last year, and he still found space. And so, are Devaris Daniels and Eric Rogers better than those two guys from 2019? Probably not, but I don't think they're far behind. So it's close. And so really it comes down to the slot receivers on the other side, on the field. And now the question is a combination of these new guys, whether it's Martavis Bryant and Kendall Wright or whoever we're talking about, are they better than Rodney Smith and Armani Edwards? And I think that's unquestionably yes. I know we don't know what Kendall Wright and Bryant are going to look like on a CFL field, but just in terms of the athletes they are. And again, nothing against Rodney Smith was a lot of fun to cheer for last year. I still remember him. My favorite Rodney Smith moments of 2019 were him throwing the first touchdown pass of both Michael O'Connor and Dakota Prukop into the parking lot at BMO. Both of them in the same game. He catches both touchdowns and launches them both immediately into the stratosphere without realizing he was throwing away a keepsake. But, in terms of the level of athlete, the football players, I think it's going to be an improvement this year. So I am giving a tough fought win to the 2021 receiver group.
I know it's famously last words, if he can get, his act together, if he has his head screwed on right, fill in the blank player. But my gosh, if Bryant's a star. He is an absolute star. If he is up here and ready to ball, he is going to be the focus of this offense. He is a flat out NFL potential Pro Bowl player. And so if he's ready to play and he's ready to kind of show the NFL, I think he is absolutely the signing of the year.
All right, let's look at the defensive side of the ball. So let's start with the defensive line. Really, we're just talking about Cleon Lang. We had Freddie Bishop was in there as a defensive end. was mostly, I think, Gilchrist for most of the last half of the season at defensive end, and a variety of people in at the other tackle spot. Justin Thomas was probably the most impactful.
Motley Crew, I think, is the phrase.
There was Lemon earlier in the season, but we didn't end with him. So, we're looking at this group. I don't think there's much debate here. Like, you line those guys up, and on the other side, you've got Drake Nevis, Kyrie Thornton, Odell Willis, and Charleston Hughes, and Cordero Law, and Shane Ray, and Fabian Foote. Like, there's 3 units that we could probably bring in on the defensive line from 2021 that are better than the 2019 group.
Yeah, it reminded me a little of the Simpsons baseball team episode. As Daryl Strawberry jumps over the fence, there's no comparison. If you look at this line now, there are still some issues. The line is old, and there's a lot of if in this Argos roster. It's exciting to have if, but there's a lot of if. But I think, there is enough solid CFL talent there that it should be, at the very least, a middle of the pack group, and if they get lucky, an elite group.
Linebacker. So linebacker, it's again kind of a mixed bag from that 2019 Argo defense. You have Bear Woods, you got Micah Awe, Toby Antigua, who kind of played a little bit of D-line as well. Ian Wild was in at middle backer for a little bit. So we compare that with a thin group that we've got from 2021, but there's definitely talent there. So you've still got Bear Woods, but you also now have Cameron Judge. You have Jack Cassar, Richard Clayette, Travis Feeney, Nick Shorthill, guys that, we're expecting to take a step. So I guess really the question is, does the difference Cameron Judge make, is that enough to take a win over Awe, Antigua, and Wild?
I think Cameron Judge is better than anybody we had at linebacker 2019.
Yeah, I agree.
So, it's still thin. It's tough. Like obviously we're fans of Cassar, but it's very difficult to come in at linebacker as a rookie. You're playing against men who know their craft, and there's just a lot of strength and a lot of expertise that you need to be able to roll out there as a linebacker. So the linebacker position is still a little thin, but I would say a slight nod, yes, it's better.
Yeah, I've done the same thing too. I think the fact that you have Cameron Judge is enough, because you've got, at the very least, you've got Cameron Judge and Bear Woods, and then at some point, probably one of these, again, we're looking for guys to hit, but there's quite a few really high-profile rookies or first-year players, like whether we're talking about the measurables of Travis Feeney or what we anticipate Jack Cassar looking like out there on the CFL field, or Clayette, again, a really interesting signing. There's a bunch of guys that I wouldn't be surprised if they came in and were able to maybe unseat Bear at some point in the season. And I think that would be a decent linebacking core, but it's all about Cameron Judge. So the 2021 group gets the win. Let's take the cover backer spot sort of on its own between doing the linebackers and the DBs. So our cover backer, again, we tried so many different guys. I think Quardarius Ford probably played the most snaps at cover backer in 2019, which just seems so strange to me. I thought it was strange the first time he was sent out there, but then they kept sending him out again, and at the end of the season, he was still playing that cover backer spot.
Oh God, they were so bad in 2019. I know it's faded, but
there were holes.
Oh God.
So if we're putting them, I don't know who we're putting in there right now. Maybe we're putting Robertson Daniel in there. Maybe it ends up being James Sample. I don't know, but let's say it's Robertson Daniel. I think he's just a better fit for that spot. I like Quardarius Ford. I don't think he's a cover backer, and I think Robertson Daniel is. So that's an easy. I don't even know if that's a positional group. But we maybe just tie those into the linebacker group. But the linebackers continue to rack up wins.
We did not have 12 professional football players playing defense for us in 2019.
We didn't. We had a few, and man, they had a lot of stuff to do. Some of those guys, guys like Darby and Shaq, are going to have so much fun out there this year with the pass rush that we're going to be able to create and the linebacker play that's going to be there. It's going to make their job so much easier and so much more fun.
Well, you just don't have to defend the whole field. I mean,
for 12
the quarterback
seconds.
has so much time. You have to defend, 50 yards deep and 30 yards in. I mean, you can't expect a DB to cover that much field.
Speaking of DBs, let's get to defensive backs. So this is a no-brainer. Again, I don't think it's as dominant as the defensive line conversation, but we're talking about Shaq Richardson, Alden Darby. Matt Boateng got injured in 2019 pretty early on. We didn't get to see him too much. But after that, it's a mix of people that had some success, but a lot of failure. We had Rob Whitson showed some promise, and he's back. But Tremaine Washington, I remember the game against BC where we were down 55-0. And somehow Tremaine Washington kept getting stuck on Burnham, who kept burning him for touchdown after touchdown. And Jermaine Gabriel, another guy that I felt really good about going into 2019, and he just didn't pan out the way that I thought he would. Anthony Covington. So you look at this current group, there's still room for improvement there, but you're bringing back your best two guys in Shaq and Darby. Boateng is healthy, and he should be out there. Rob Woodson hopefully takes another step. And then we bring in Cresden Butler, James Sample, Mike Tyson from the Bearcats, who I'm excited to see. Tristan Decoud, Jeff Richards. Jeff Richards actually is an interesting one too. It's sort of a dark horse here to get a starting spot in the defensive backfield. So I give the win. I think it's a pretty easy one to the 2021 group. JB?
Yeah, we talked about it's not as exciting as the 2020 group would have been, but it's still an improvement. I think that, again, there's a lot of unknown. There's not a lot of CFL experience, but you've got, fantastic measurables, fantastic athletes. If they can come together, the talent is there for it to be a really good defensive backfield. I wish, I think the theme of the 2021 Argos is maybe. And, maybe. Because, and that's not taking I don't think that's hoping, because the talent is there. I don't think hope is not a plan. I don't think they're hoping these guys will be good. I think they are good. It's just a question of, will they gel as a unit? Will they adapt to the CFL game?
So it's like maybe with an exclamation mark. Maybe.
Yes, exactly. It's 2021 Argos. Come get some. Maybe.
Let's go on to special teams. So Jake Reinhardt's coming back as the long snapper, so that's a wash. You've got Boris Beatty seemingly going to kick and punt, I think, which I love, because it's like I talked about before, it saves a roster spot. And he can do both just as well as and better than what was done in 2019. So the 2019 group, you had Ronnie Pfeffer and Tyler Crapina. With Crapina, I loved his accuracy. He's McMaster, I think. And, a great kicker, but it drove me crazy that we kept missing 50-yard field goals short. It drove me just to the edge when we couldn't score anyway. It was so hard, and then finally you get a field goal opportunity. It was a 50-yarder, but you just don't want to come short on a 50-yarder, and it just kept happening. And Boris Beatty doesn't have the accuracy that Crapina had. He's not far back. He's close, but man, he can boot it, and we are not coming up short on any more 50-yard field goals. His punting is on par with what we saw in 2019. So I think just simply for the lack of frustration I'll feel at those 50-yard attempts, I'm going to give the edge to the 2021 group and Boris Beatty.
It's an interesting gambit. One I've always wondered why coaches didn't try, which is to try and sneak that extra position. You're putting a lot of pressure on him. If he goes down, if you can't punt and you can't kick a field goal, that is an issue. I think it's good. I think you do it as long as you have an emergency backup where this wide receiver will kick field goals or this guy can punt. And I don't see how you couldn't. You could definitely teach an athlete who is elite enough to make a CFL team to be a passable punter. And
you're talking like in-game. Like obviously if you have a week to prepare, you're not spending the whole time teaching Cresden Butler how to kick field goals.
Which is why teams in the past have never coaches are so risk adverse. The idea of the whole kicking game going sideways when one guy goes down.
So the idea is if Boris Beatty were get injured in the first quarter, then we've got someone for the remainder of the game that can at least has done it before.
Yeah, I would hope they would plan for that. It seems like a reasonable play.
So yeah, it is a dominant win for the 2021 group. Huzzah! We will be better than 2019.
It was not the world's highest bar to clear. So certainly I am happy to say that they have, because, they might not have, and then God, where would we have been? So congratulations to the Argos. You have taken the second worst team in the CFL and made it better. So to finish up here, I've looked at another Argo who needs some recognition, and obviously hardcore Argo fans are aware of him, but I think that Conridge Holloway is a man who should continue to get his praise. And I know last year when I wrote an article about putting statues, I had him as our number 2 quarterback. And I think that the Argos have done a good job of recognizing him, and I don't think it's an issue of him being unrecognized, but I do think he deserves to have some praise here in Black History Month. So Conridge came from the States. He was a baseball player and was actually drafted by the Expos, but was too young to sign a contract and went on to play college football at Tennessee. He was the first black quarterback in the SEC. So he was a groundbreaker there. And as often was the case in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the NFL did not respect him as a quarterback, and they drafted him as a defensive back. And he had heard that there was opportunities in the CFL for African-American athletes to play quarterback. And he came up to Ottawa in 75 and played some, but really came to people's notice when he joined the Argos in 81, and really was the turning point for the Argos. The Argos had not won a Grey Cup in 33 years. 33 years. That's a long time in a small league to not win the championship. And Holloway was the grandson of a slave, came up here and led the Argos to a Grey Cup. And I think that it's so important to recognize how much opposition there was to the idea of a black quarterback being a leader, that a black man could be a player at the thinking man's position, all this kind of racist claptrap that these guys had to deal with. Even here, even though they got their chance in the CFL, so much racism poured upon them. And the fact that he was such a key figure for the Argos and really initiated a turnaround in the 80s where the Argos became more popular and kind of a thing again. I think that it's really important to recognize how groundbreaking Conridge Holloway was, and really how great he was. He statistically, he's a little behind Ricky Ray, but Ray played more and played in with a more pass friendly era, but he's not that far behind Ray. And, he is statistically the best quarterback in Argos history. I would argue if you take per game average and adjust for era, Flutie was amazing, but he was only here 2 years, and Ray was good. But I would suggest Holloway is the greatest quarterback in Argos history and should be, continually recognized for his accomplishments and for what he faced, and should be celebrated.
For me, he has my vote. I think he is the greatest quarterback in Argos history. He is the guy that made me an Argos fan. And it wasn't about the numbers, for me as a young kid. That stuff didn't really matter. But he was larger than life. He was he had this amazing energy and presence to him. And just watching him was so exciting. Watching him play football. I was already a football fan, fairly newly so. I had fallen in love with the NFL the year before, so I was kind of aware of football. But no one was talking about the Argos until he got here. He arrived, and then suddenly it was a thing. And I remember watching it, just being so excited that I could be an Argos fan. And it was all on him. It wasn't anyone else. There wasn't a single other player I probably could have named at that young age on the team. But I knew Conrad Holloway, and he was my idol. He was my hero. And again, just to think about how much he went through to get to that point is unbelievable. He completely dominated my young childhood football experience because, every time I went out to play and throw the ball around, I was Conrad Holloway. He was my hero. And so, yeah, I'm really pleased that we got a chance to recognize him and really remember not just the numbers and the amazing production that he had on the football field, but how difficult a path it was for him to get where he got to.
And an amazing sort of aside is his mother was the first African-American woman hired at NASA.
I'd heard that, and that's pretty astonishing to me. I think that's really cool. I also heard a story, I don't know if you can verify this or not, but I had heard that when the Expos wanted to sign him, it was his mother that wouldn't sign the papers because he was 17 or 16 or whatever.
He was too young.
Yeah, he was too young to sign. And so she could have signed for him, but she said, no, you're going to college, which, obviously it turned out really well for him. But, what an amazing thing to say. These guys want you to go play professional baseball. No, you are going to school. I have so much admiration for that. And, obviously she knew exactly what she was doing. And, good for her as well. What an amazing family history.
Yeah, I mean, I think he has gotten his recognition. I'm certainly not arguing that he hasn't, but I do think it's important for everybody to, just to be reminded of what he did and how great he is.
Well, that's going to do it for us today on the X's and Argos podcast. Please don't forget to rate, review, and tell every CFL fan you know about us. For JB, I'm Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe.